signed. Committee Room 30, 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 sound.
Okay, colleagues, good morning and welcome to today's meeting for the Committee for the Economy. I'm joined in the room by David Honeyford, Diana Armstrong and Gary Middleton, and online by Sinead McLaughlin and Emma Sheeran. Are there any apologies at this stage, members? None. Item 2 is declarations of interest. None. Okay. Item 3 then, members, is chairperson's business. So first one, members, is just in relation to a question asked by Sinead McLaughlin to the Minister on Monday in relation to the Good Jobs Bill. The Minister had reiterated that it's her intention to introduce the bill into the Assembly in January 2026. Are members content to seek an update to see if the Minister has received executive approval for that and if there's any further details on theme C of the bill? Members content?
Yep.
Okay. Secondly, members, in table papers there is correspondence from ICTU, which is the Irish Congress from Trade Unions, seeking an update in relation to regulations from the Domestic Safe Leave Bill. Members content that we seek an update from the Department on those?
Yes.
Okay. And then item 3, members who may have read the order papers will see the unfortunate news that Emma Sheeran is leaving the committee after this week. Emma, you and I may not have always politically agreed, but you have always been an excellent contributor to this committee and you have served it diligently, so you will be missed. So can I just, on behalf of the committee, thank you for your work and dedication to this committee. It's greatly appreciated and wish you well in your new role. No problem. Draft minutes, members, are at page 7. Members content that I sign those as a true and accurate reflection? Yep. Agreed. And are there any matters arising? If none, then we'll move straight to our first evidence session. If I'll invite colleagues forward. The committee will receive evidence from Matrix on the recently published report entitled AI and the Future Work in Northern Ireland. Can I refer members to the presentation from Matrix at page 46 and a copy of their AI and Future Work in Northern Ireland at page 65. I want to welcome Patricia O'Hagan, who is Deputy Chair of Matrix, Tom Gray, Chairperson of AI and Future Work Steering Group at Matrix, Steve Orr, Catalyst CEO, and Jill Shaw, who is from the Open University. I'm delighted to welcome you all here today and thank you very much for taking the time to come along and share your expertise with the committee. At this stage, I'm happy to hand over to you if you wish to make an opening statement. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm Tom Gray. I'm a former Group CTO and Director of Innovation at Agnews, and I'm currently Strategic Advisor for same organisation. Also visiting Professor of AI and Innovation at School of Computing and Ulster University. Now, forgive me, I'm getting ahead of myself as I tend to do.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to just introduce Matrix and then hand over to Tom, who's actually chaired this report. Yep. So thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss our report with you. And just to give you some background, Matrix is an independent science and technology panel. And we consist of like 18 industry members representing most of the key industries in Northern Ireland, and we also have 10 ex officio members representing other interested parties such as universities. We are supported by a small secretariat team within the Department for the Economy, and our role is really to provide advice and inform the government and also industry and academia about emerging issues related to science and technology. We have a work plan that is really agreed by the committee. So members bring forward issues that they think are pertinent that could perhaps be an opportunity for the Northern Ireland economy. And we commission research and we manage that through steering groups. We also promote science and technology as key drivers of the economy and would attend, events. So, for example, yesterday we were at the Tech Tides event in the Northwest, supported by the Secretariat, who were also there as well. So we're really, let's say, we're an opportunity there for everybody, all the departments, should anyone ever want to look more deeply at some aspect relating to science or technology in relation to the economy and how it can add value to it. And we would welcome you to consider us as a resource. So today we have 4 of the panel members, and we all contributed to our most recent report over the last year. We've published 5 key reports, one looking at the regulatory technology landscape, another one looking at the space industry in Northern Ireland, and one about decarbonisation of the built environment. This very important one, the AI and the future of work in Northern Ireland. And the most recent one was looking at the photonics and laser capability within Northern Ireland. So I'm going to hand over to Tom, who chaired the steering group on this important piece of work.
Thank you, Patricia, and apologies again. I've already introduced myself. I had the pleasure of chairing the report on the impact of AI on the future of work in Northern Ireland, and I'm very clearly enthusiastic about summarising it to you over the next 10 minutes. Now, we believe that over the next 5 years, AI is going to fundamentally change how every single person here and indeed in Northern Ireland does their job. This isn't a might, this is a will. The only question really is whether Northern Ireland will be driving that change or whether it'll be scrambling to catch up while we watch the opportunities disappear one by one. This isn't a report about what might happen, it's about what's happening right now and what we need to do this year, this month, today to secure our future. Actually, if you've got the slides, you can follow along, and I'm at the project context and objectives page. Now, Matrix commissioned this study for the very same reason that similar entities across the world are thinking about these things. We could see what was coming towards us, what was coming towards the economy, and we needed facts and robust analysis to support our hypotheses. The 6 questions outlined here aren't academic. These are survival questions, and when we talk about redefining workforce structure, what we're really asking is how do we keep our people relevant? When we examine sectoral susceptibility, we're trying to figure out which of our industries will still exist in their current form, and I would posit that in the long term, none of them will. They will all be transformed. And bear in mind that while we worked on this report, I have to say that I've been delighted with the level of engagement from both our industry colleagues and from the department. But while we worked on this report, others were working on similar activities, and it was released 2 months ago, and obviously the rest of the world has been implementing in that time. It's maybe worth just spending a little bit of time looking at a couple of AI concepts, just to clarify things up front. There's been a lot of talk about generative AI, and I'm going to try and position that in the overall AI spectrum. So before generative AI came into sort of everybody's vocabulary, there was traditional or predictive AI. And that AI is all about making predictions, hence the name. It analyzes historic data to find patterns and forecast future outcomes. So think of it a bit like an analyst who's answering questions like, what will sales be next quarter? Or is this transaction a fraudulent one? Now, because it's looking at prediction, it's looking at the future, and the future is not certain. Therefore, no prediction made by an AI is ever going to be 100% certain. So typically it will say, I think this is going to happen, and I'm 60, 70, 80, whatever percent certain it is. And it was up to the human who is, I guess, driving the AI to make the call whether that is indeed the likely outcome based on that human's experience. Then Gen AI came along and kind of took the world by storm. And this type of AI is all about creation. It's all about generating stuff. And that type of stuff is new, original content such as text, images, video, computer code, music, any type of content like that. But that generation is going to be based on patterns that it has learned from its training data. So I guess think of it as a creator that's going to respond to a prompt like write a program about a robot, write a poem about a robot, or create an image of a red car. And that's kind of where most people's knowledge has stopped. But what's really big in the industry today, where a lot of investment is going into, is what's called agentic AI. Now, those two previous types of AI, and they're not entirely discrete, because obviously a Gen AI is built on predictive AI. It uses prediction to create content. But those two previous types were based on the premise of providing input or providing context to a human to make a decision support type activities. Agentic AI is all about action. It's a system that can autonomously plan, make decisions, and execute multi-step tasks to achieve a specific goal with minimal human interaction. And it often uses Gen AI or predictive AI as its brain to do the reasoning and the planning, but its main purpose is to do things like booking a trip or managing a project or automating a complex business workflow. So in short, traditional AI predicts the outcome, Gen AI creates new content, and agentic AI acts to complete a goal. This slide, AI is no longer horizon technology. This is both an inspirational slide and possibly a slightly terrifying one. AI is not a distant technology today. It's in everybody's pockets. It's processing insurance claims. It's writing code in software companies in Belfast right now. We've moved from tools that help us work to systems that can think, plan, and execute independently. But what should really grab the attention in this slide is the pace that the technology is moving at. What we thought might have taken years to achieve is happening in mere months. We're looking at adoption curves that are breaking every past precedent. And this is both a massive opportunity for us, but it's also a massive risk. The studies have shown that impact is uneven across both sectors and territories. And that's important to understand. It's not affecting everyone equally at this point. It seems to be hitting entry-level staff and knowledge workers hardest. And if you think about the NI economic structure, that should be setting off some alarm bells. But global projections show dramatic variation depending on how a region or how companies respond to the AI opportunity. And the difference between net job creation and massive displacement isn't necessarily down to the technology itself. It's heavily dependent on the policy response, on what governments decide, what companies decide on what they're going to do next. If you look at the sectoral impact assessment, if you look at the top of the table, information and communication, or the software sector, professional services, these are going to be highest hit soonest. And these are really the sectors where Northern Ireland has been building genuine competitive advantage. It's got high GVA impact, it's got high employment levels, and that's our biggest opportunity for transformation, but it's also our biggest risk if we do not transform, if we do not respond in a timely fashion. And a lot of these organisations are FDIs, and that FDI concentration piece is crucial to understand. We've built our economic strategy in part around back office knowledge working activities, and that's exactly the type of work that AI excels at. And if jobs came here because our labour was cheaper, AI doesn't need to be paid. If it's here to do routine processing tasks that employ thousands of people, AI can do them much faster and much more accurately. And if you look down that graph, the more physical the work, the more resilient it is at this point in time. So construction, agriculture, food service, these sectors aren't immune from AI, but they're not in the immediate firing line. Although I would not be too complacent. If you look at what China's doing in areas like construction, with robotic construction and the rate at which they can build, for example, airports, compared to, say, Heathrow's new terminal, yeah, it's coming. It's just a matter of when. So the question really isn't when this transformation is going to happen. It's whether we in Northern Ireland will be ready for it. The next slide is really just a more concise summary of that, but I'm going to take this opportunity to digress very slightly. So AI primarily automates tasks. It doesn't replace jobs. It transforms jobs by changing the collection of tasks that a person is responsible for. So if you want to think about it, a task is a single defined piece of work, like writing a line of code or summarizing a document, entering data into a spreadsheet. And AI is excellent at automating these specific, often repetitive, arguably low-value tasks. And the task is done faster, more cheaply, at a greater scale by the AI. Sometimes human intervention, sometimes not. And a job, however, is a complex bundle of many different tasks that fulfills a role. So, for example, a marketing manager, a marketing manager's job isn't just one task. It's a collection of tasks like analysing market data, which can be automated, like drafting advertising copy, which can be augmented by using a Gen AI, both to maybe make suggestions and to review. It involves setting long-term brand strategies, and that's really a human task. That's not something for AI today. Mentoring a junior employee, negotiating with a vendor. All these are human tasks. And AI automates some of these tasks within the job, but it'll rarely automate them all. And in particular, AI will struggle with tasks that require high-level strategy, interpersonal empathy, complex judgment, or physical interaction. So the job itself will not disappear. Instead, its bundle of tasks changes. And the human worker will spend less time on the newly automated tasks, like data analysis, and more time on the remaining human-centric tasks, like setting strategy and mentoring. So why am I saying this? I think it's important to understand that AI can free people up to focus on the higher value work of deciding, I guess, which tasks are important, how, in the marketing context, the overall brand voice should be represented. So I think the primary role here is to accelerate adaptation. Economic strategy should shift from a potentially defensive posture, which is how do we protect existing jobs, and move to a more offensive one. So how do we build an agile workforce that can harness AI as a tool, capturing the productivity benefits that it undeniably brings, and managing the resulting social and economic transitions. And if you look at the economic modelling for Northern Ireland, economists would suggest that we're looking at between 200 million and 3.7 billion in additional economic value from AI adoption by 2030. Now, the low case, the 200 million, stands for cautious adoption patterns with limited economic diffusion. The midpoint suggests meaningful but measured AI integration across Northern Ireland's economy, and the high case models accelerated implementation scenarios generating transformational economic impact and representing ambitious but plausible change given adoption patterns that we're seeing across other regions and across sectors. And that 2 million to 3.7 billion is a significant difference, and it's the difference between proactive policy action and reactive scrambling. The 10 questions that we posed in scenario planning, these will to a large extent determine our future. And we used them to create 4 plausible scenarios to aid planning. And each of these questions really represents a choice, not an inevitability. So will workforce reskilling keep pace with technology change? And that depends on how a business or how the education system helps prepare the workforce. Will benefits be widely distributed? That's a policy choice. It isn't a technology inevitability at this point. And the critical insight that we found is that we're not passive observers here. The answers to all these questions depend on decisions made in rooms like this by people like you. And question number 9 is one that I guess keeps pulling at me. Will Northern Ireland move with leadership and pace? That, I think, is the fundamental decision point. We can be leaders or we can be followers, but we can't be slow and still expect to be competitive or even relevant. I would recommend that you read the 4 scenarios in detail if you haven't done it. They are quite informative, and they're a really good way, I think, of sort of framing some of the potential and some of the challenges. But the team created 4 scenarios of a potential future, and they are the Titanic leap, and this would be Northern Ireland's Apollo moment. We become the Singapore of AI adoption, turning our size from a disadvantage into an advantage. We can move fast, we can experiment boldly, we can coordinate across our entire economy in ways that bigger regions just can't. And in the AI stampede scenario, you get prosperity, but it's not necessarily for everybody. Belfast, for example, becomes a tech hub, but we create a 2-tier economy where the benefits don't reach working class communities or rural areas, perhaps. In the crafted catching up scenario, we prioritise fairness over speed, and everyone is hopefully comfortable, but we fall behind regions that moved faster, and sometimes a careful, cautious approach can be a dangerous, risky approach. And then finally, there's the slow lane spiral. And this is the scenario that absolutely keeps me awake at night. It doesn't necessarily signal catastrophic failure, but it kind of indicates gradual irrelevance. Our young people, for example, leave for opportunities elsewhere, more exciting jobs, more lucrative jobs. Our businesses can't compete with the global competition, and as a region, we experience death by 1,000 delays. And the strategic challenges, we feel that Northern Ireland should be well placed to benefit from AI while mitigating the risks. The region has several distinctive advantages. It has genuine research strengths in cybersecurity, which is increasingly grounded in machine learning and in health technologies. We've got a small scale that should enable rapid policy experimentation. We've got an innovative private sector that I believe often punches well above its weight. However, to make the most of these strengths and to move forwards towards preferable futures, Northern Ireland must also address a number of strategic challenges that could undermine its AI readiness. And the one that I'd probably highlight at this stage is leadership and cultural barriers. It's going to take real courage to, I guess, move forward in an agile fashion with pace. It's about being willing to make tough decisions now to avoid harder consequences later. And I think traditionally that's not something that we're particularly good at doing. And I think the scale of Northern Ireland is both challenge and genuine opportunity. We are small enough to coordinate across our entire economy and society. And I believe we can't afford to get this wrong. And the recommendations, I won't go into any of these in detail, they are in the report. But in summary, how can we turn challenge into opportunity? So we produced 10 recommendations across 3 themes, and we believe that every single one of them requires action this year. Not next year, not when it's convenient, not when we've done more studies, this year. Now, we were writing that in June and July. I was presenting this in September, and now we're heading towards late November. and I'm not convinced we've actually done much in the meantime. And it needs to start this year. We're looking at willingness, capability, and capacity. So these are the three legs of a stool, and if you get one wrong, the whole edifice collapses. Now, in writing the recommendations, we did recognise that many of the proposed actions will need to be delivered by public sector organisations working within constraints. And these recommendations are therefore designed to be catalytic, enabling practical action now while building capability and confidence over time. And AI adoption does not need to be flawless from the outset, it just needs to be underway. And that's certainly what I've found from the companies that I've worked with, the companies that experiment early, albeit with sufficient caution, steal a march on the competition that the competition finds really hard to catch up to. And to close this opening summary, we feel that Northern Ireland stands at a critical point. We have a choice to make, and not making a choice is in itself probably the worst choice of all. We can own our AI future, or we can watch it happen to us. And the window for proactivity is closing rapidly. Every month delayed is a month that other regions are going to use to build competitive advantages that we will simply struggle to match. But what gives me hope is that we have done things like this before. When we have transformed Northern Ireland from conflict to prosperity, we have attracted global investment. We've built world-class universities and innovative businesses. But a transformation that benefits both economy and society won't happen by accident. It'll only happen through coordinated collaboration across government, business, and education, and of course the wider society. And I don't believe the question is whether AI will reshape work in Northern Ireland. The question is whether we will shape how that happens. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And I just have to say, if you don't understand the answers, that's entirely on us. So please feel free to ask for clarification or ask us to repeat. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That was very, very useful. I'm going to start by going to our in-house AI expert.
It's so good to me. Thank you. Best care. And sorry I was late. I'm really, really interested in AI, and thank you so much for your presentation. I thought the scenarios set out are incredibly helpful, so thank you so much for that. A previous witness to our committee said that they're actually less worried about AI taking jobs away and more worried about us not being able to fill the skills gaps. And so I'd be interested in kind of your thoughts on that, but specifically in relation to the public sector, what more we need to be doing in terms of upskilling and reskilling. So much of this is policy choices, Tom, so thank you for saying that, and we're not just passive observers. So I'm kind of interested in the AI job skills, what we need to do specifically in relation to the public sector. I'm also kind of interested in, you talked about cybersecurity. I passionately believe that we can be a world leader in responsible and ethical AI use. And I just wonder if maybe you could talk a bit more about the guardrails we need to put in place that doesn't stifle innovation. I completely agree. When you think of cybersecurity, we're world leaders in that. There's so many success stories from Northern Ireland, and this is a real opportunity, and we have to move with speed. So the kind of two areas I'm most interested in, what do we do about public sector right now, and how do we ensure that we're world leaders in ethical, responsible use of AI, but in a way that doesn't stifle innovation.
Okay, well, I've been talking probably quite enough. Do you want to take the skills question, Jill, in the first instance?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the recommendations in the report around upskilling and critical AI literacy in general across the population, and then in addition the technical upskilling, I think helps us see where we can work with public sector in particular. The recommendations there are around stackable credentials, so having a kind of a standardised certification means that then we can have recognised certification a model like the ICDL, which is the International Certification for Digital Literacy, is a model that works quite well. And I know certainly from my own work with the Open University that kind of stackable credentials, learning credentials, make sense, because then we can reach people where they are. So you don't need to step out of your job for a year or 2 years to develop these skills. You can develop them while working. A nice example of that recently with the Open University collaborating with the Department for Infrastructure is that we've now got the Open Learn Hub available for all Department for Infrastructure staff, so that they can access lots of free courses online in the Open University, but also have a pathway to professional development. I think that kind of model is really valuable, particularly for public sector, because then there's a standardised platform. I think that will be a really important one. And I think also we've seen great investment from the Department for Economy on the Skill Up programme, which was it's still running at the moment. I think the future is still to be decided, but that was investment for anyone who working in work to take on small study, micro-credentials or postgraduate study. And an investment like that means that we also have opportunities to bring the AI literacy generally, but also professional skills along there. I think as well the model of meeting people where they are within their workplace is a really important one, because we're, rather than expecting people to take time out and go and study a couple of nights a week at a college, or if we can provide that range, that provides us with the opportunity to ensure that we're getting breadth of coverage. And I think that also leads quite nicely into another issue, I think, about making sure that we reach people beyond urban centres. We have a really good example of that collaboration that happens in Northern Ireland, which isn't happening in the rest of the UK from the Open University's perspective, where we have validated programmes in FE colleges. So a really nice example of that is the Northern Regional College has a programme that's been developed by the college in collaboration with industry experts to address local industry needs, and then validated by the Open University. So people can go and study in their local college on, for example, that qualification is a foundation degree and a top-up in cloud computing and cybersecurity. So you can study locally while working part-time, for example, or taking a day out for that kind of study. And we have the opportunity then to shape those qualifications quite quickly in comparison to maybe taking a longer time at a full-time study.
Feeds so much into the Minister's vision for regional balance as well. And I guess that's what I'm interested in, is what we're doing now, but that has to sit alongside what we're doing in terms of education and what's happening within schools as well. So for the future workforce, we're preparing them as well. So interesting. And then just anything about the ethical and responsible use of AI, what guardrails, because that's the thing that I think people are most worried about. Like there's a range of people who are like, this is the solution to everything, and then people who think that the robots are coming, and then people who are just really quite worried about it. And I think I'm in that place where I can absolutely see the potential, but I also am very aware of the dangers that we need to mitigate against. And so ethical and responsible use for me is essential.
I'm happy to follow on that one. I think that if we take on that approach of stackable credentials which are standardised, that gives us the opportunity to ensure that we have that critical approach to AI and responsible use of AI. In introducing the ideas around the potential risks, copyright infringement, data security and privacy, and developing that kind of standard understanding, I think within a kind of recognised certification or credential means that we can be a bit more confident that there's a general awareness and understanding. So rather than hoping that people will come across the concerns or issues, if we can introduce that in a kind of methodical way, right through, I would say, from primary and secondary and tertiary education, and within those AI skills short courses. I think it also helps us to address those concerns about misuse or misinformation that might arise. So I would say that we've got an important opportunity now to influence the understanding right across the population, rather than hoping by chance that people will come across it.
Thank you so much.
Can I? add to that as well. That's a very important issue, and I think gaining confidence of the public is very important so that we can allay the fears that people have. Education is critical, but there's other things, other actions that we need to take as well. And I think one is involving people when we're developing our policy for Northern Ireland, that we engage with people in the workforce, general citizens, and give them a voice and an input into how we use AI and how we manage it. And like ethical AI is really about upholding the needs of people and doing no harm to them. So they need to have a voice in that. And we have, we will need structures around that. Most ethical organisations will have an ethical framework, and probably a group of people who have responsibility and foresight for that, and they would train the members of that organisation in individuals' responsibilities in relation to responsible use of AI. So we've work to do, but we are supported by the AICC, who have a very strong focus in this area, and they have published the AI Hub, which provides a lot of very useful information to help small entities create their own ethical guidelines to use within their organisations.
I've just set up an all-party group on AI, which you're all very welcome to be involved in, and AICC are going to be providing the Secretariat support to that. One last thing, because I honestly could talk about this all day. I absolutely see the potential for businesses. I agree that it's now up to us how we act and how quickly we act, and we need to act with speed. I think if we're going to be leaders, we don't want to be part of that slow lane spiral. Like, I'm in politics, so my kids don't move to Australia, so that they stay here. We need to have opportunities for them. But I'm very conscious there's this generation of children who are growing up where we don't have those ethical frameworks in place yet, where it is kind of the Wild West. And I think we have to do so much about critical thinking, what we're doing within schools. I love what you've said about the importance of voice. What more can we do to, I guess, support and ensure safety for children who are experiencing and experimenting with this like everyone else, and ensuring that there's protections for them?
I think that the pilots that are mentioned in the report that have been undertaken with teachers in schools, there's two programmes there. One was the Trailblazing NI Gen AI in Education by Ulster University, and another one by Google DeepMind with using Gemini technology in the C2K environment. Both of those are really clear in terms of how we can bring the benefit of Gen AI tools to teachers in terms of productivity, but also improving their confidence around the critical responsible use of AI. And the recommendation in the report is to roll that out, right across schools, because then we do have using that approach as well in terms of training or teaching the teachers first gives the confidence at the teacher level in order to support the pupils and students, so that we're delivering a uniform, or at least a consensus in terms of that sensible approach.
You're doing really important work. Thank you very much. And thank you, Chair. You're very kind.
No problem. Yeah. If I could just start then in terms of the 10 recommendations that you made. So who do you make those recommendations to, or in your view, who owns those recommendations for implementing?
At its very simplest, Matrix reports to the Department for the Economy.
Okay.
So, I mean, we've delivered the report to the Department for the Economy. We have, I guess, identified stakeholders who we believe are probably most likely to be the appropriate organisations, but we have not had significant engagement with those. So that's with the Department for Economy to decide how to best disseminate that. But obviously, if you think there's a better way of doing it, more than happy to.
No, that's just just trying to see who owned it. So, in terms of, you made that presentation in September to the department, have they come back to you in the 2 months to say, right, thank you so much for these 10 recommendations. This is our view of how they will be implemented, who will do them, and here's progress on them?
Just to a small extent. So my view of current progress is that the department has assembled a team to look at how to move forward with the recommendations.
Okay.
But that's as far as it's gone. I mean, I'm not aware who the team is, and there hasn't been any further communication with me on that. So, small amount of progress. Steve?
Chair, if I may,
Of course.
at this stage, so I think the urgency sort of was the common thread that ran through Tom's comments and introduction that is so important. I might just add a little bit more to that, but then also some activities that are underway, because I think what's really important with this is that this urgency is so great. Those that have independence or agility and who can change and just move and get started anyway need to do so. And I think what I might be able to share is what we have already been able to do with the department's support to make some progress, in this direction. So just if you're not familiar with Catalyst, so we're an independent non-profit Northern Ireland Science and Tech Hub, Belfast and Derry. We were a Good Friday Agreement project. We're home to 140 companies, and we specialise in for many years in entrepreneurship, now in open innovation, but then also in making sure that the opportunities are created in the new innovation economy are accessible to everybody. So inclusivity is now critical to us. I had a visit to Boston in March. We've developed quite a close relationship with the Martin Trust Centre at MIT over the years, and how they've helped to develop a lot of our entrepreneurs. And it was in a conversation with the then Executive Director of the Martin Trust Centre and a presentation that he sent me that made me think, we need to stop everything that we've been doing and we need to reboot all of it, and we've got 2 weeks. Right? And so the presentation that he had sent me was just charting the AI acceleration. And some of the examples in his presentation were, if you built a software company 10 or 15 years ago, you could have needed up to 1,000 or 1,500 staff. And you could have taken you 10 years to get to 100 million in sales. Within the last 12 months, there were about 8 that had done it within 12 months with 20 to 50 staff. Okay? So whenever Tom said that this isn't something that's coming, this is something that's live and real today, it's happening so rapidly. So we, in a short space of time, decided to redesign everything that we were doing. And so we are live today with a program called Co-Builders, which is AI entrepreneurship. And that is for people that we would typically have done entrepreneurship for. Largely the decades past, the people who are good at passing exams, the meritocracy, they come in and they're a little bit more confident in forming companies. But we've also, in the last couple of years, introduced a new program called Hello Possible, which is for underrepresented founders. So for people who might have felt over the years that Catalyst is intimidating, we speak a language that we expect them to come to us, whereas what we need to go to them. And so within both of these are now, while they're founded on the discipline of entrepreneurship methodology from MIT, it's starting to look at how can AI how do we train people on those tools in order to do this. And we will be launching, we think in Derry in January, what will be absolutely world-leading agentic AI entrepreneurship within the Co-Builders program. We may just beat MIT in how quickly they're implementing this. So, but taking all of that experience, we've also been doing a lot of work in the inclusivity work in helping kids furthest from opportunity. So our Strive program, which was supported by International Fund for Ireland, to look at how can we help people that have never felt as if they've belonged, many of them have lost hope, in order to do the confidence building steps to be able to feel like they belong in a world like this. And it's incredible to see the results you can get whenever you do. We've also been working with schools for many years now, but we've also been working with school leaders. And then how do we help them to come into this world to better understand it and transition it? And then the last thing just to talk about in our experience, we also are part of £30 million worth of Peace Plus projects. So at deeper level, if you've heard this concept of moats, right? So it's barriers to entry. So, if you look at the stack that was in the Matrix report of where the sectors are that are most vulnerable, the ones at the top, where there's low defensibility, they have what's called low moats. The ones with deeper moats, where there's better barriers to entry, I'm mixing metaphors, but that's where the university programs are important. So you've got the investments in the likes of the City Deal investments, the Momentum 1.0s, but they can take years to result in competitive advantage, but they're very, very important for long-term competitive advantage. I think a lot of what we're talking about today is the short term and how, but the upshot of all of this is that the skills barrier is collapsing, right? The time that it takes and the ease and the intuitiveness of being able to become proficient in these tools is really quite fast. So it's just about creating the environments where people can make them much more accessible. And the risk, and where the report talks about the digital divide getting wider, is it's without providing those simple opportunities for, to make that capability development much easier. So I hope that little bit of context was
That's really useful.
And I think that everything Steve's doing is extremely laudable, and we can give other examples of, I think, really good progress elsewhere across the economy. I can talk about how Kainos is now the 4th largest provider of AI services to the UK government, and the other 3 are actually infrastructure providers. But I think that could indicate a tendency more towards the AI stampede approach, where you have bifurcated the economy, and the fact that Steve's looking to speak to some of the less privileged, that could elevate those to a tech millionaire status, but there's still going to be that sort of massive pool of the underprivileged or the folks who don't get the benefit of AI. So it's part of the solution, but I don't think it's the entire solution for an ideal Northern Ireland outcome.
I think, and we can follow this up at the end of the committee, but we would be keen to get the department in and see who the senior officer is leading this and how many of these 10 recommendations in the 2.5 months since its publication have been implemented. I'm going to say very few. I just want to check Open University. I'm a huge supporter of the amazing work you do, and I was down recently at your headquarters in Belfast just chatting about the DFI programme that you are doing. Has there been any discussion with the Department for Finance about making that available across the entirety of the civil service network?
Yes, I believe that there has, and there's work on public sector, civil service learning platform at the beginning of the discussions there. I think that's underway.
Okay, perfect. And then my final question is just in relation to the complexity of regulation here in Northern Ireland. So in a previous presentation, some of our witnesses said that it provided a major opportunity that Northern Ireland had the dual regulatory regime. Others have said that it made it more difficult. I see one of your recommendations is that we need a AI dual market compliance support service. Do you think there is a current lack of understanding in terms of how the regulatory differences here in Northern Ireland may either be an opportunity or a threat?
I'll go for that one. So it's not clear as we go forward which regulatory framework we're going to have to follow in relation to this. Like currently, the approaches between EU and the UK are quite different in this area, with the UK taking like an innovation approach, where regulation is relatively low so that innovation can happen. And the EU has come forward with the AI Act, which puts more constraints and governance around the use of AI and actually prohibits the use of AI in some areas. So we've got two different stances. As an SME owner, I know delivering product into a market and having to deal with regulation is a big overhead. However, once you can deal with it, it opens up that whole market for you, and the EU is a significant market, so being able to adhere to that level of regulation opens up a lot of opportunities. From my experience, I would say that the level of regulation required to deliver AI solutions into the UK is much less onerous So if an organisation has customers in the EU and are delivering to meet the needs of the AI Act, then they will certainly be able to service their customers in the UK as well. So it opens up trade opportunity as such, and the fact that your product can deal with more than one regulatory framework is a positive as well, and it opens up opportunities for companies who have product within the regulatory space. You know, that's their specialism.
Yeah.
I would say there's a great lack of understanding of the EU regulations within Northern Ireland, and that, you know, is an area that we need to support people in.
I would reinforce that answer. And the companies that I would tend to deal with, you know, if you've got multiple regulations, you typically have to, you know, comply with them all. Mm-hmm. So an additional regulatory framework is just more work, more complexity for the organisation, but just have to suck it up and do it. But the opportunity, which is probably untapped, is for organisations to create solutions or services that makes it easier for these companies to comply with multiple regulatory environments.
Thank you so much indeed. I'm going to go online to Sinead.
Thank you very much for your answers so far, and I suppose just following on the skills base, would you encourage reviews to take place on all of our existing strategies at the moment in order to consider whether they're fit for purpose, given the pace and impact of AI? And the one area that I'm really thinking about is the skills strategy, because even if we could achieve or meet the recommendations within it, it doesn't facilitate a kind of skills surge program and the targeting of skilling and reskilling in order to help support workers, or particularly to help support displaced workers as well.
Yes, I would say that there's some really positive aspects of the skills strategy, but I agree that in particular responding to the difference and the change now for displaced workers. We know that women, it's in the report, that women are overrepresented in jobs that are highly vulnerable to automation, especially in administration roles, and having the support for groups like that to reskill and to be AI capable, so not necessarily reskilled into technical roles, but to be capable, AI capable, and using the technology within, as Tom mentioned early on, making use of the technologies for beyond those automated tasks. That's a new aspect, really, I think, that needs to be integrated into the skills strategy to ensure that we are supporting displaced or vulnerable roles.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think it's something that we need to go back to the department and discuss just what considerations that they're actually given to that at the moment. And then the other thing I would like to kind of tease out a little bit further, in the papers you indicate that there's 198 firms, I think, currently active in Northern Ireland's AI ecosystem, and there's an equivalent of full-time workers of 1,340 working specifically in AI-related roles. And it goes on to say that 73% of those firms are based in Belfast, and 89% of the AI employment is also there. Derry has 4%. Hosts 4%, where other councils, in fact, have shown very limited activity in relation to that. I think that it could be enhanced, obviously, and great work has been done, and Steve has alluded to some ongoing new technologies and a new organisation and firm been opened up in Derry, but we're sectoral strengths in manufacturing and the agri-food tech. There really is potential to build up those sectors and those constituencies and technologies. Is there an opportunity to look at AI through a place-based policy making, and has that been considered in the scenarios? Because I really do think it's so important at this juncture, when we are having to move at pace, that we do not leave communities behind.
I think the short answer is that yes, there's opportunities to look at AI through a place-based lens, but equally, I think every lens that we look through, there should be a degree of AI consideration generally. I think the figures that you're quoting came from the AICC report.
Yes,
and
it did.
In that context, AICC is looking primarily at the companies that are building AI products and services, as opposed to organizations that are applying AI to make their existing business more efficient. So I think, although we haven't done the study either, I would say that an increasing number of companies are starting to introduce AI productivity tools to their day-to-day business across all sectors that are not, strictly speaking, tech sectors. And that, I think, is also one of the main opportunities for Northern Ireland. It's not so much about how do we build an AI tech sector, because we already have that in progress. I'm not saying it doesn't need more investment. It does, and AICC is doing that well. I think the real opportunity is diffusing the benefits of AI across the entire economy, whether it's NIE networks down to the corner shop that could benefit from taking 3-4 hours out of admin work every week to allow them to do something more valuable with their time. And that, cross economy diffusion is really something that can only be done at a governmental level.
Okay, and Steve, would you have anything just in terms of place-based policy in relation to this, anything to contribute to that?
Funny you should ask. We have been working for 6 months on a project called the Atlantic Advantage, which is a cross-border, multi-stakeholder consortium approach for how the northwest region of Ireland can leap ahead in the age of AI, how through upskilling SMEs in exactly the way that Tom said about in tool capability, but also very, very importantly in investing in the long term in entrepreneurship. Because as a parent, and I will have children who are going to turn 18 in 4 and 7 years' time, I'm also thinking about what's the future hold for them. And what I would personally do, what I am doing, is making sure that they have the number one survival skill in the future, which will be entrepreneurship, which will be their ability to create their own jobs, because there may not be the same provision of jobs in the future that other people have. And this is something I think that's been very, very important to all the stakeholders in the Northwest, is how can we invest in that capability, but then how can we introduce AI tools, agentic tools, in order to collapse the stages in the developing, so we can develop a place-based advantage that should, through that concentration in time, result in it pulling ahead.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Just to follow up on that, I think we're actually starting to discuss, the implementation of the recommendations, because if we are genuinely looking at diffusing AI knowledge across the entire economy, one sensible way of doing that is you break it down into manageable chunks, and those manageable chunks will be geographically based, and it makes sense to focus the initial activities on the high priority areas, which may not be the current sort of Belfast. It probably are some of the less urban areas.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you all for your presentation and for sharing the report with us as well. Very insightful. One of the the challenges that you talk about in page 8 of the slides was around specific structural vulnerabilities, specifically in relation to SME adoption. You reference it lagging significantly behind larger enterprises. What specific things could we do? And Steve, you've touched on this in terms of what's going on in the Northwest, but there's no doubt that there's many SMEs out there who are, as you describe, sort of AI curious, but may not have the resources almost to scale up that sort of support. So have you any ideas in terms of what could be done to support that sector?
Yes, can I pick that up? Yeah, being, coming from that background and being a owner of a SME, I think the biggest challenge is time. So being able to convince those owners of the businesses to take time out to learn, and they will all be curious about it. So Steve actually ran a very good event here in Belfast, and the Chamber invited members along to that, and it brought an AI expert in for about 3 hours, and by the time we were walking out the door, everybody had already created something on AI. So those short interventions can be really impactful. And we really need to get to the owners of the businesses and the leaders, because they are the people that will make the commitment to adopt this technology and go forward with it. They may not do it personally, but they will have the vision. They understand their markets, their business, where the value is, and they will see how to apply it most effectively in their business. And that will generate not only the productivity improvements that we can get very quickly from it, but also innovation, an injection of innovation into our SME community. So getting those, and that's one of our recommendations, we need to educate the leaders within our SME economy.
Can I add to that, please? So I think it's a critical first step is how do you help people to have the epiphany for what AI actually is, and you can do it in an hour and a half. Actually, just to relate it back to an earlier question about the public sector and elected officials, I would suggest we need to start with elected officials and just helping, if you haven't experimented with AI tools and taken the time to do Tinker Time, I think if we could just get everybody, because we can start there first, it's going to be easier from there. But the ease now of helping people who struggle to get access to talent to get up to speed on how to use agentic tools in order to do things that they couldn't do before, all of a sudden is there. But the one thing that I want to stress, and if you look at the data coming out of the States on this, the technology on this is important, but 80% of this is change management, right? So whenever you're looking at what interventions are going to be important for SMEs or even big established companies, the leadership, they call it leadership literacy, the AI literacy, that epiphany moment. But helping with those enterprise adoption pathways is as important, if not more important, than the technology itself.
I would add to that too that enhancing our general approach that all of us have, certainly here, in terms of the importance of lifelong learning is really important. We've seen really good examples of industry, government and education collaborating together to coordinate efforts. And I think if we can take the opportunity now, we can really release capabilities and skills across the workforce quickly rather than waiting for a long-term implementation. I think that's really important.
Jill, you touched briefly on in your recommendations as well, scale AI in schools. From the pilots. Could you maybe just talk a bit more in terms of the successful aspects of those pilots and where exactly did they take place? I know within the university. They're with
one of the projects had over 80 teachers being trained in how to use a Gen AI tool, and then those it was really a professional development sessions for those teachers. So some of the outputs from that are really impressive in terms of productivity and efficiency for the teachers themselves, releasing up to that 10 or 12 hours of free time through the productivity, which gives them more opportunity for engagement with their pupils. But also then there's evidence that that's really improving their confidence in order for them to start using the technologies with their pupils. I think it also gives highlights the opportunities then the teachers can have to kind of release their time for higher value work, which would obviously be attractive for all of us. But I think that certainly the recommendations are to roll those pilots out to a much broader context quite quickly. In terms of the recommendations, I think that the suggested timeline is within around 18 months, which is really quite ambitious. But I think there's certainly a lot of enthusiasm, and it will then set up the young people within schools across primary and secondary with those critical AI literacy skills at a very basic level, but thinking beyond that in terms of how they might use those tools beyond.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Sorry, I would actually add to that, and it's probably relating to Kate's question, in that I think it's almost a duty for us to do that within schools, because as well as giving them critical skills, we would also be helping them to be more prepared to counter some of the risks that AI brings. I mean, one of my worries is that we're creating a generation that kind of relies on AI as gospel truth, and I think that is worrisome.
Critical thinking.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, David.
Okay, I think guys, for this is really brilliant. I think the potential and opportunity for entrepreneur as a people or entrepreneurship is phenomenal, and the stuff that's come from Northern Ireland, and AI sort of always looks backwards, so there's an opportunity for to shape and to do stuff which is really potential. One of the things I'm really concerned about is this becomes a tick box. We've come to the committee, we've presented to you've already said you've presented the stuff, and you're talking about urgency, and the Department of Economy and urgency, those two things don't normally align, and that's the kind of concern I have. You talked about tough decisions. What are the department the best? What are those decisions, and who delivers them?
We can all get Jeff here.
I think I'm sure we all have a lot to say in this area. It's not all on the Department of Economy. They can't possibly address this huge issue on their own, and they'll need a lot of support. And there are things, obviously, like education, that sit with the Department of the Education. And then there's other things that we need to do, like in terms of raising awareness of the whole population. Department of Economy can't do that on their own. So it's going to take collaboration across government, but also into industry and academia as well. So there's already engagement, with the business organisations who have already started to engage with their members. But it's such a big lift here. If you look at the skills team in the Department of Economy, like how many people can they put through courses in a year? Hundreds, maybe 1,000 or so, But we need to really upskill thousands of people, tens of thousands of people here.
Who leads that?
So who leads that? Well, one of our recommendations, in a way, was we already have leadership within the public sector. So Helen McCarthy has made great progress there in organising at many levels, the data, the people, and developing a policy. We need that level of organisation for the private sector as well. And we've made a recommendation that we get an AI champion who would be an independent person who could interface with the public sector and the public as well.
So if we look at the recommendations is enable startups and transform existing business, 90% of our economy, our businesses here are small businesses. So you've got some of the big guys who have got the finances and the ability to and are investing in this. So those small guys, if we're to change, I'm trying to think of things that we can actually do to deliver stuff. Yes. If you're to change those two recommendations, the startups and the transform, what policy levers can be pulled or changed to enable that to happen?
If I could, I think one of the things why this is important, why there is a need for a bigger public response here than a private one. If you look at other cities in the US, for example, culturally, they're more used to self-organising, so you get much more of a bottom-up response to this. They will, there's bigger economies, more established companies. They will start to organise events where the knowledge sharing starts to permeate a lot more. There's good things like Software NI, and there's good things being organised in conferences that Tom's organised, but it's not at the same, anywhere near the same extent that you would get places like that. So there is this cultural dependency on top-down here, right? So that's why there is this need for what would be a bigger proportionate response from the public sector. So one way that I would look at this, and I think it comes back to a question that the chair asked earlier, was about economic strategy. So if the economy in Northern Ireland was a business that I was running, I would look at every possible intervention that we can do, and then I would stack rank them by the potential of economic impact against the targets that we had set. And then I would look at but I would also do it through an AI first lens, because I think that would be the first thing. Do we accept that that's going to be a reality? Or even if it's scenario modelling, that's a scenario we've got to consider. And then I would look at what else sits above it and challenge that. And so it's quite a simple way in order to start to look at what are we already doing? Where is the inertia? And then let's just have a cold, objective look at, and then what's the scale of response that's going to be required? Because a lot of this, from what I've experienced so far, it doesn't necessarily require a lot of new money. It can be the repurposing of existing budgets. The infrastructure, a lot of the delivery organisations are already there. I think where the inertia comes in, and that's not unique to Northern Ireland. I think this is a Western democratic challenge. It's how can those institutions adapt? Does the agility exist in order to enable the kind of the speed and then the scale of response that Tom talked about, at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think we can look at successful ways to communicate out to the public. The Open University with a social mission is really focused on that, and we've got some nice examples in Northern Ireland. The Libraries NI now, every computer in every library now has free Open University courses that anyone can access who's using the libraries. That's a way we can reach quite a lot of people that in the past hadn't been possible. And another, I think that we, as Patricia mentioned, already organisations and institutions are taking action. The co-productions the BBC and Open University do nationally, there's another opportunity where we can really connect in with the particularly AI literacy and have opportunities. I think particularly in Northern Ireland there's a lot of enthusiasm for that.
Yeah, what you're talking about is lots of dots.
Yeah.
It's how we coordinate that to actually deliver this going forward. That's kind of.
Can I add something? So I think Steve's point is absolutely spot on, but I think the key thing here is that NI government needs focused, empowered leadership. So who actually owns this challenge? And I mean that could be the CSTA, and I mean Helen is absolutely capable of doing it. But remember that the CSTA is sort of the Chief Technology and Science Advisor, who is currently operating on a part-time basis. So, is it realistic to expect somebody part-time to be able to do something that really needs sort of a full-time, sort of highly engaged with industry, responsibility? So maybe it's somebody that sits under Helen's remit. But I think there needs to be a clear owner for the diffusion of AI through the NI economy, or whatever we feel that the remit is. So one person who's ultimately responsible and empowered to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Diana?
Thank you so much for coming in this morning and for the report, which I found really, really fascinating, and thank you for delivering that today. Many of the questions I was going to ask have been asked, obviously, but I'm just thinking this is probably the equivalent to the Industrial Revolution, It's really the stage we're at, and it permeates every layer of society. I think the education piece for me is interesting, how we prepare, how we look at the curriculum as well, so that goes in tandem with the economy, because learning isn't linear any longer. Young people in education and primary education, it's shaping those entrepreneurs to think differently. Have you looked at how, say, for example, the US is embracing educational change to work towards AI?
You go first.
I'm not sure if I have any clear evidence on that, but I do think that we are already adapting how we think about tertiary and university education with flexible online and stackable credentials, and I think that approach is something that we have the opportunity to look at within particularly secondary education. I know there's been a review of the curriculum there, so it's quite timely that we can take time to look and see how can we shift the kind of where our focus is to give people the skills beyond maybe the traditional subjects.
I think we can look a little bit closer to home for the answers. So we ran a program called Catalyst Schools, which was to help school leaders adapt into all of this context. And through that, we got to build a relationship with St Malachy's. And what St Malachy's had created with the prototype digital hub in North Belfast is excellent. It's phenomenal. And where I then volunteered my time to help to coach the team at St Malachy's was how could that hub be scaled into a scale solution for up to 12,000 pupils a year across 12 schools in North Belfast. And Patricia mentioned earlier we brought somebody over, for a series of events here with NI Chamber and Software NI. So that was Paul Cheek from MIT. Actually, the department helped to sponsor bringing Paul over. But Paul Cheek spoke at the event whenever St Malachy's presented their vision for scaling it. Paul is an advisor to the US government on the evolution of education in an AI first world. He said what they have developed is as good as anything you'll see in the States. So I think I would encourage anybody who hasn't seen it to go to St Malachy's and listen to the model that they've developed, because it is first class.
I think we have a tendency to undersell ourselves. There's a lot of very good positives, and they don't actually get the sort of bandwidth they should. And just another thing we're looking at as a committee is the legislation for the Good Jobs Bill, and it's looking at how that will be affected. I'm not sure that there's any clauses in the bill about AI, about AI in industry, AI in the workplace. And do you think that's something that they should be considering? Yeah.
As I said before, I think everything that we do needs to be re-looked at through an AI lens. Just ask the question, what would happen if, I guess in the case of education, cognitive skills, that has primarily been the driver of, I guess, value in services companies, because cognitive skills were expensive and hard to come by. In an AI world, cognitive skills are cheap and freely available. If you think about what generative AI does, it effectively knows everything that's ever been written, and it can bring that back to not necessarily entirely perfectly. So I think the need to be able to recall information shrinks down, but the need to be able to, I guess, analyze and understand and be creative and make connections becomes ever more important. So Steve said, what the survival skill is entrepreneurial. I guess I would agree, but I would also say that another survival skill is adaptability. Because you will no longer be in a world where you've got a job for life. You'll no longer be in a world where your job is, I guess, primarily constrained by a job description. You will be in an environment where things are changing at a rate of knots, and you will have to be able to adapt to that. And I'm not convinced that we're preparing our young people for that type of environment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Patrick?
I'm having quite a few technical difficulties this morning, so if I cut out, sorry about that. I'm going to ask my two questions just immediately, if that's okay. So you've touched a lot on the education system, which I think has been covered well, but one of the issues I was really interested in was that you mentioned a sort of, I suppose, a class divide, and one of the issues being that could exacerbate that. And I suppose the education system acts as a real potential equalizer there. So just how do you feel that those two interface? And my second question is around yesterday's event. And I know you mentioned you were on Derry yesterday, but there was also an event in the Long Gallery here, which was around Go Succeed, and I wanted to declare an interest as a former participant in that program. But the one of the things that was raised by quite a number of businesses was how they felt AI would offer them a lot of opportunities, and I wanted to get a sense of how you feel the interactions are between yourselves, department, um, Go Succeed program, I suppose Invest more broadly, and any of those local enterprise agencies who are doing that work as well to make sure the businesses that are coming out, because as has been mentioned already, businesses want to be involved in AI, but sometimes they can't for various reasons. And I suppose the Go Succeed and other programs are an opportunity to have AI in there from the get go. So I'd be really interested to see how that works.
Thank you. There's an interesting example of a successful project locally. It's the CDIT project run in Belfast Met, but it's supported by Bank of America, and it's targeted reskilling of groups. Particularly, there's an example there of women who are not in employment being reskilled into with digital skills. And that's developing into a bigger collaboration across higher education and industry to bring an event there for those graduates out of their short courses to look at the progression, routes of progression for more upskilling. And I think that kind of model is something that helps reach people where they are. It's helping to bring the skills to the people in their own community, and then bringing them along on a pathway into employment and upskilling. So I'd be keen to see more investment in that kind of approach, even though it's quite small scale. It's usually 16 to 20 participants at a time, but particularly for those people who are out of employment or who have not got a skill set already, that's a really a nice example, I think, of bringing that the opportunities to the people where they are.
Can I pick up on the second point there about Go Succeed? And definitely Invest Northern Ireland needs to look at all their programs, support programs, with an AI lens, because it's a great opportunity. Previously there was one considering e-commerce, for all startups, and if we can get that people exposed to this thinking when they're starting their business or thinking about scaling it, it's a great accelerator. So it should make the programs even more impactful. But also it will be transformative for the people going through those programs. But that's one that definitely the Department of the Economy, has control of and can do something about.
And I guess there's a complementary point with Invest Northern Ireland. So there's Invest Northern Ireland's programmes that are AI-centric or could be AI-centric. But then, as we've discussed, there's a need for Invest Northern Ireland to look at their existing programmes, be it sort of funding, be it education, skills I should say, and look at what is the consequence or what's the impact of AI on that. So for example, as Steve has outlined, you can now go from idea to, I guess, viable product in small number of weeks in some cases. But if you've got a funding system that won't give you an answer within the next 6 months, it becomes academic. I mean, you've either done it yourself, in which case you probably didn't need the funding anyway, or you've missed the opportunity because a competitor in a more agile region has stolen that from you.
Yeah, no, those are really interesting points, and I think it is a huge opportunity. And I mean, the businesses we spoke to yesterday were really keen to use AI where they can to enhance their businesses, to grow their businesses, and some of them actually mentioned how AI had been a real catalyst for change in their business. So look, that's really interesting, and a lot of the questions on education have been answered, but I do think that that's a really, really important point to emphasise, and I'll certainly take a look at that programme. So thanks for the recommendation.
Thank you, Patrick. Can I thank you all very much indeed for your work and dedication. This is a vital sector, and no doubt we'll be in touch with you very soon once we've spoken to our friends and colleagues in the department to see how their progress in doing this is. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we'll do follow up back. Can we let our guests know? We'll just take a short recess after this. Is it okay?
Chairs, sorry, I should have declared an interest as well. My husband actually has an office in Catalyst Space, so I was a bit late for it.
Might get an upgraded office.
Please don't.
Okay, colleagues, my one suggestion is that we contact the department requesting that they come and brief us on their implementation of this so we can see who the senior responsible officer on this is and the work that they're doing. I think the department in the forward work plan cancelled the evidence session on the first week of December.
So you want then?
Yeah.
So we'll endeavour, yep.
Get that happen then. Members agreed with that? Members content we take a short recess just before we open up into our next session? Okay. Committee will adjourn now for around 5 minutes.
We'll just push the button.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound.
Okay, we'll now move on to item 7, members, which is a presentation from the National Franchise Dealers Association. And I'll invite our colleagues to join us. Okay, colleagues, I will now receive evidence and a further briefing from the National Franchise Dealers Association on car registrations in Northern Ireland as a result of the Windsor Framework. There's a briefing paper 220 and 228, and I welcome back Alastair Peoples, Jeff McCartney, Dave Sheeran and Alan Murphy. Colleagues, thank you for coming back again. It is disappointing that you've had to come back again as we don't have a resolution to this issue, but it's a very important one, so the committee is very pleased to welcome you here today. Can I hand over to you to make an opening statement if you're content, gents?
Okay, Chairman. Well, I hope we don't disappoint you with what we've got to say. Thank you for inviting us back, Chairman and members of the committee. It is, however, with frustration and indeed a degree of exasperation that we sit before you today. We've actually seen very little progress in finding a solution to the problem affecting the free flow of new vehicles within the United Kingdom. The franchise dealers in Northern Ireland are facing nothing short of a generational challenge because of the post-Brexit arrangements and the Windsor Framework. Indeed, those serious and detrimental issues we highlighted some months ago are now having a critical effect, with dealers seriously considering job losses as they now plan for next year. Customers in Northern Ireland are experiencing reduced choice in new vehicles now, with certain models no longer a vehicle locally and facing higher costs compared to Great Britain. The situation is affecting not only customers and dealers, but also future investment in the sector. My colleagues will now give some evidence of the serious effect this is having on their franchise dealerships, and I'll hand over to Dave.
Thank you. Maybe it's worth recapping where we are. So we're heading to this cliff edge in January where the full transition to the GB national type approval is complete, and effectively the industry has been transitioning in the last 6 months, so we're already seeing some impacts in the market, and colleagues will outline some of that later on in this submission. If you summarise where we are, because of the Windsor Framework, the Northern Ireland market is now no longer part of the UK internal automobile market, and that's worth 2 million units a year. The market here is 45,000, and we're in the EU for the purposes of type approval as a requirement of the Windsor Framework to protect the EU internal market. Year to date, 10 months into the year, 6 vehicles have moved from GB to the Republic of Ireland. So the regulation is protecting a market of 6 units over a market of 45,000 and excluding us from the UK internal market. Maybe worth just touching on a couple of consequences that we sort of highlighted would come. Benefit in kind tax on certain vehicles, plug-in hybrids, is becoming a serious issue. It's an increasingly important part of the market, and Northern Ireland customers are going to be paying higher benefit in kind tax as a result of higher CO2 calculation used by the EU for the same vehicle that's on sale in GB. Now, the government have signalled their intention to equalise this, but an intention doesn't help us take an order, because nobody's going to place an order until that's actually part of law. So intentions are no good in terms of solving this problem. We're seeing, as a consequence of that, the cost on a monthly lease or a PCP, a finance agreement, for that same vehicle is higher to a Northern Ireland consumer than it is to a GB consumer.
Would you have a average calculation / figure of what that differential is?
It can vary by model to model. It could be, you perhaps, Jeff, you have some information.
Yeah, I think with the Land Rover brand on a Range Rover Sport, it varies by £60 per month because it falls into different benefit in kind banding. So,
yeah. And if you take that over 36 months, it's a significant on cost. So really, we're starting to see this bite now. The other thing we said was that the Northern Ireland being such a small marketplace, it's effectively a barrier to entry to some of the new entrants to the UK market that are giving consumers more choice, more cost competitive vehicles, and making some great traction in the marketplace. A number of those brands have elected at this point not to come to Northern Ireland, and there will be some brands that will be looking at their volume in Northern Ireland to establish brands, and they're going to be considering, is it worth staying here? So we really are coming to the point where where the pain is starting to bite. And we're already seeing in the marketplace that fleets initially have decided that they will source their vehicles for Northern Ireland consumers, in many cases from GB dealers, to work around the issue. And they would be vehicles that would normally be supplied by us, our companies and others in the sector, to consumers here. So it's only a matter of time before the retail consumer gets into car tourism and decides that it's better to go and buy their car over there to get access to the full market, full choice, and the full cost competitive nature of the marketplace. So we really do find ourselves we're pretty much on the cliff at this stage, and 7 weeks to fix the problem, or we have an acceleration of the trends that we've already seen. Maybe I'll need to talk about some of that.
Thanks, Dave. So, Chair, I've just circulated a graph which covers the Northern Ireland registrations, retail registrations from January of this year through to October. And we're comparing the Northern Ireland performance in a retail registration market against that of our UK as a whole. So the Northern Ireland, across those 10 months, the retail market is back 6%. In comparative to that, the UK market is up 5%. And I suppose it's been more stark of the more recent months, and since the guys were here in July time, that market in Northern Ireland is down 11%, and the UK equivalent market is up 4%. So we are starting to see this bite, as Dave has mentioned, and this is a trend that seems to be continuing in terms of Northern Ireland's performance across the retail opportunity. So we
quantify that in value across the year. So obviously it's down 6%, but what that?
Yeah, it's down 6%. So from a quantitative perspective, it's about 1,500 registrations behind. Had we matched the UK's market at this point, it'd be 1,500 registrations. So, it could be £50 million of turnover. If you're taking £35,000 vehicle, 1,500 registrations, that sort of number. So, it's not to be sniffed at in terms of the delta between us and the UK, and that seems to be certainly getting more challenging of late. September particularly, which is obviously a big registration month, the UK was up 9%, we were back 15%, so that's a 24% delta in that 1 month standalone. So certainly we are seeing consumers vote with their feet in some of the choice aspect to it, and I know Jeff certainly has some examples of some of the impacts that we've had with some of the manufacturers of late.
Yeah, maybe just to give you a bit of an insight into what way the retail market works. A lot of these manufacturers build to order, but a lot of them just build because they have a certain amount of vehicles that they've already planned to come into the UK. I think we explained this a little bit in detail before, but if those vehicles aren't sold, then that brand will put certain customer offers on it, whether that be deposit contributions, customer savings. Our customers in Northern Ireland can't avail of those because those vehicles have been built with UK type approval and not EU type approval, and that's where we're seeing this massive movement in the market. Alan's outlined just that it's 1,400 units. It is, but we can see that delta is getting worse as the year goes on. Now, we predicted this in July when we were here. We predicted it in January when we met the Secretary of State. We're now on a burning platform because we're going to see more and more of this as we move into 2026. But our retail market is disappearing, and we're very, very concerned about it. And we're at this cliff edge now going into 2026 that we really need to bridge, and we need a decision quickly. From our point of view, I think it's wrong that our customers should be disadvantaged in any way. And today, that is the figures bear out that that's happening as we speak. We are prevented from taking additional brands because it takes longer to get type approval. The retail market that we're in today is disappearing in front of our eyes. We're very concerned, and that's why we're here today.
Another example, maybe Vauxhall Corsa is the #1 selling small car in the UK. It's a big player here, particularly in the mobility segment. We haven't been able to take an order for 3 months for that vehicle because the engine is not going to be compliant at the time for EU type approval for the time these vehicles will arrive to be registered. So there will be a solution some way down the line, maybe. But we're locked out of that market for 6 months, whereas GB have full access to the market. So, okay, someone else may have picked up that sale from another brand. But the point is, if all brands are affected, there's a delta.
I think Vauxhall is a perfect example. Both Dave's organisation and mine represent the Vauxhall brand. And we can see, if you pick on that brand alone, which is a big player in the market, in the UK, their retail sales year to date are up 16%. In Northern Ireland, they're down 59%. It is massive. The gap is getting wider and wider as the year progresses. So that, as I say, that just is outlining some of our concerns that we have. And I think just to go back on some of the information that Dave mentioned, the threat of vehicles going into the EU, i.e. the Republic of Ireland, there have been 6 so far this year, but our market's disappearing in front of our eyes. We're very concerned.
Yeah. Do you want to? Well, no, I think, Justin, we think there's a very obvious solution to this, and this is the challenge. It appears quite pragmatic and simplistic to us as operators that we need to extend the GBNTA, the national type approval, that we can register those vehicles in Northern Ireland to allow Northern Ireland consumers to have all of the choice of the UK market as a whole.
Yeah, the government have signalled that they are minded to align to EU rules to get the manufacturers to comply, but the government shouldn't be surprised that the manufacturers comply to the rules that they put in place for GBNTA. So GBNTA is the only solution. Whether the UK aligns to the EU rules in the future is somewhat irrelevant if GBNTA applies and the manufacturers adhere to those rules and it applies here. But we need to be in the UK internal market, not in some hybrid market that actually doesn't exist.
So you've now heard firsthand the calamitous effect this issue is having on Northern Ireland dealerships. The Department of Transport's Vehicle Certification Agency has said, and I quote, "It is important that dealers and consumers in Northern Ireland are not restricted in their choice of vehicle brands and models and have the same choice as their counterparts in the rest of the UK." And indeed, the Secretary of State has said something very similar. This is a ludicrous situation, and one in which those we have engaged with in government, both here and in London, realise must be resolved. As my colleagues have said, a change in legislation will take time. What we as an industry need now is an extension of the transition timeline to bridge the point where EU and GB standards can be fully aligned, giving the industry a pause to urgently get a workable plan in place. And we need to know, committee, that you will do everything that you can to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alastair. If I could just start then in terms of your engagement with the UK government. So Secretary of State wrote back to this committee following your first appearance. You met them in July, isn't that correct? January last year. You met the Secretary of State?
January this year. 25, yeah.
Okay. And you've had no further interaction or discussion?
No.
No, although Gavin Robinson, I think in the Northern Select Committee, did raise that, and I think as a result of kind of getting caught out on that, the Secretary of State has asked for further and urgent work to be done, because I think it's very easy to see this as a small problem, maybe when you're sitting in London, but here it's clearly a major issue.
Exactly. And in terms of the record, just to reflect in the importance of the sector, both in terms of the financial transactions, but also just in terms of the employment levels that you employ in all communities right across Northern Ireland, what does the industry represent currently in terms of employees?
We did the figure.
It's in the paper.
17,000.
17,000, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, it doesn't take a genius to work out less sales, less income, less staff. Okay, I'm going to open up to my colleague Jonathan Buckley, who has been to the fore on this issue.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for coming to the committee again. You know, this is a disaster written all over it. I think that it also blows gaping holes in what some of us have been saying for some time, that the myth and the concept of dual market access is nothing when it comes to looking at it, how this may impact upon our own dealerships here in Northern Ireland. I think the most startling aspect of your presentation, and something that I have been pushing on for some time, is that here we have the desire, the proclaimed desire to protect the EU market, in which only 6 vehicles are entering. In fact, the real challenge would be there's probably a lot more sales from GB into the Republic of Ireland, in terms of how you protect those traders. But I just want to focus on some of the specifics, because it's important that we put this into context. There's a real world impact. So 17,600 jobs pertain to your dealerships in the Northern Ireland economy. What do job losses look like if this issue isn't sorted and we go over the cliff in January? Has there been planning on that in your respective dealerships?
We haven't planned for it. We're hoping against hope that this issue is going to be sorted out. The last thing we want is to start making some of our people redundant that we've had to train for years and get that experience. So the last thing we want to do is to go down the road of job losses. Inevitably, that will happen. We'll have to be modelled into our budget programme. But we're here today. We've spoken to the Secretary of State. We've spoken to some of you individually. We're hoping that this can be sorted out, because we see this as being a simple fix. You know, when you see something as being such a simple fix, why would you plan for disaster?
Yeah.
And that's where we are today.
So I want to put it again in context. So the government has gone to great lengths in the United Kingdom to support UK car industry. Okay, we've seen that, whether it's Jaguar, Land Rover, and indeed others. So would I be right in saying that British car brands such as Vauxhall, JLR, for example, will feel the greatest impact of the loss of GB type approvals, which will result in Northern Ireland consumers paying more? Would I be right in that statement? Will the impact primarily be faced by those industries that the UK government are committed to trying to support in the UK?
In terms of selling vehicles into Northern Ireland?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we go down the list of manufacturers who've already opted, even at this early stage of single type approval, we have Renault, Nissan, Land Rover, Vauxhall, Peugeot, Citroën, Maserati, and others will join, because if they've got a commercial advantage in the market, why wouldn't the rest of the brands do exactly that? So yes, we've got a huge list at this stage, but we feel that that's only going to get greater as time goes on.
And we're already seeing brands which are dual approved, so effectively, technically, you know, the car can be registered in either jurisdiction. Now, with the PHEV issue, they have decided that they're dual approval for the majority, but a couple of the PHEVs, they'll go single approval. So you're already seeing, as we said before, the fragmentation of the dual, because the GBNTA allows some lower standards than the EU. And they're going to take advantage of it.
And I think that's where the smokescreen is from the Secretary of State in saying that this issue's been sorted. Because in reading your briefing, it became very aware that whilst some of these manufacturers may claim dual approval to begin with, but it's the point of leaving the factory that is actually the point in which they decide which scheme to register under. And that's where the point of pressure comes. So on that point, what brands are particularly hit when it comes to accessing the Northern Ireland market?
You said Vauxhall is primarily. Yeah.
Are you talking about new brands or existing?
I'm talking about new. So you talked about Vauxhall, Corsa. You mentioned. Is there any other particular models?
All of those brands that I've mentioned at this moment in time are single type approval brands. They're not dual approving. So those are the.
When
brands.
the Secretary of State tells us that, I would like to stress that there is no tactical impediment to manufacturers dual approving a single vehicle so that can be sold across the UK. However, whilst most manufacturers have chosen to dual approve, a minority has taken a different approach, resulting in some of the issues raised by the car dealerships. Is it a minority, or is it a case that whilst there may be more that are dual approving, but when it comes to registration from factory, it's the single approval. Am I right in that?
You absolutely are, and those brands that I've talked about don't represent the minority in terms of the market. They're big players in the Northern Ireland and UK market.
And more of the dual approvers they've all reserved their right to single approve, either completely or selectively. And what we're seeing now is they're selectively tailoring vehicles to the GB market to compete with those who have gone with the GB NTA approval, the single type approval. So the industry is complying with the law. Yep. The law gives them, the law is,
You mentioned other brands such as Renault are not dual approving, Citroen, Peugeot, BMW, making cars dual approved but still designated as either EU or GB when leaving the factory.
For a small proportion of the PHEV, because competitively, that marketplace has a very high reliance on the BIK percentage that's generated by the vehicle. So to compete in that market, in the GB market as a whole, which is primarily where the lion's share of their business is going. Northern, NI is just 2% of the UK market as a whole. So a bit of collateral damage, that's fine almost. So there are some pockets of stock which is being specifically retained GB type approval because they feel that gives them the competitive competition advantage in the GB market as a whole. So
your industry to me seems like a growing number of canaries in the coal mine. In a sense, you've been warning about a cliff edge and the impact in your industry, and whilst the UK government, particularly the Secretary of State, by his actions or inaction, has essentially caused both trade diversion and harming GB manufacturers supplying into Northern Ireland. And that brings me on to the point about the worst of all worlds. So I read in your briefing, you can't send back cars to GB in the event of overstocking. You cannot access GB stock to meet customer demand. So that may be that somebody wants a black car or a white car. I think you used the example. How do you plan business model planning? Like, I would imagine this is a common issue. It's either overstock or customer demand. How do you deal with that going forward if this issue is not addressed?
Very, very difficult to plan. We will plan based on our annual sales plan. I think the biggest issue is the type of market. I mentioned this is a very tactical market. So when the brands build vehicles, they're not building them to Northern Ireland type approval. So if there's a cohort of vehicles, let's say Vauxhall have a load of Grandland vehicles, as they call them, sitting in the UK that they haven't sold. What they're doing is they're putting a special offer on those vehicles. We can't take them. But the rest of the UK are taking them, and that's where you're seeing this difference in the market in terms of that the increase that there's in the UK market, but we're not running at the same pace.
So that was a specific example of the new Vauxhall model where there was a 35% offering which was only pertained to GB, couldn't apply to Northern Ireland, and that essentially is...
It did apply to Northern Ireland, it's just we could do it, but we couldn't take the vehicles because they weren't type approved for Northern Ireland. So we had access to the same offer, we couldn't take the vehicle. Okay. And our customers then didn't benefit from that saving.
The chair has mentioned, and it's a more complex area of your business, but something I think we need a wee bit more understanding of, which is benefit in kind complications and taxation issues. How big a segment is that of your business model, and who is that applying to? So that's essentially, do you want to spell that out first? Because I think that's a technical point that not many will understand, but again, when looking at the broadsheet, I'm seeing how whether it's Northern Ireland business customers or indeed maybe even in the public sector are being disadvantaged when it comes to from forms of taxation, which are ultimately then again shrinking the marketplace.
Absolutely. Well, Dave can explain the taxation part in terms of the size of the fleet market that you're alluding to. It's 27% of all cars sold here in Northern Ireland.
27% of all cars
sold in Northern Ireland are through the fleet channel. 33% of all private cars are sold through the private channel, and 40% of the market then is Motability. So that's how the market is made up in Northern Ireland. So fleet is a significant part of our business.
And with that fleet and that benefit in kind, would that include public sector, so such as maybe it's the Department of Health or other departments that are accessing vehicles through that particular model?
Yeah, salary sacrifice would be a common channel, which the fleet market would fall under the fleet market as a whole. And certainly there are lots of businesses as well as public bodies that would offer salary sacrifice schemes to support their employees, and they effectively pay a benefit in kind on that vehicle through that channel is how that scheme works. And we are seeing with the changes in the EU type approval that benefit in kind level is expected to jump quite significantly in a number of models. So that's definitely going to impact the demand for those vehicles, certainly through those channels as well.
It specifically relates to the plug-in hybrids and something they call the utility factor, which is used to calculate the CO2 emission. There's a new EU test or a formula applied, which is generating higher CO2s than the same vehicle when the GB NTA formula is applied. So the same vehicle can fall below or above the threshold for tax. So it's pushing more vehicles into the higher tax threshold, which is why brands like BMW have decided to opt for a GB NTA approval for certain vehicles to keep them under that tax threshold. So plug-in hybrids are an increasingly important aspect of the market as manufacturers try to meet their zero ZEV mandate obligations. So it's a growing segment, and now the government have said we intend to, or we are minded to equalise this tax inequality, but being minded to doesn't help you when you're asking someone to place an order and the tax might be this or the tax might be that. They'll say, well, I'll wait or I'll buy something else where it's clear.
Finally, from me, because I know others will want to come in, I want to talk about the solutions that you've suggested. So I think very obvious one in terms of, it's not a solution, but it's a bridging post, which is the extension to the transition in terms of the derogation. I think that's a very low level ask. I think that should have been guaranteed, given that there's such a cliff edge that it's now presenting. But in the longer term, you've stressed, and I think right to do so, that ultimately from a car manufacturing perspective, that it is essential for the Northern Ireland marketplace to be firmly within the UK internal market. That's where your supply chain is. There is no threat to the EU market in such a regard. I find that interesting in of itself. Lord Murphy just recently completed a review in which the European Union even refused to have interaction with him on the issues caused. And I think these particular points really do go to the heart of it, because at the moment it's very, very easy to tell what vehicles are maybe coming through GB N9 into the Republic of Ireland. A very definitive way of finding that out. So the potential for contamination as such of the EU market is extremely limited. I would be right in that assessment.
Yep.
Okay. And in the longer term, you've mentioned how, taking Northern Ireland and applying it back to where it should be, which is in the UK internal market for type approvals, is essentially the only real long-term solution which will save the industry here, secure jobs, and ensure that our consumers are not put at an economic disadvantage to others within GB. You mentioned that this is something that has been done in other aspects of the Windsor framework. I think it was VAT related for second-hand cars. Do you want to elaborate on how you see that as a long-term solution and how achievable you believe it is?
The VAT issue was a sort of maybe an unintended consequence of the Brexit crossover, and effectively the way the regulation was written, we were going to be paying VAT on top of the vehicle that already had VAT in it when it was brought into Northern Ireland. The government stepped in within months, days to say, look, we're going to sort this problem out, carry on as you were. We'll give you the air cover, if that's the right word for that, while we sort the solution out. And it took them 6 months to get the solution in place, and it works fine, which returned it to the normal VAT environment that we enjoyed pre-Brexit. So there is precedent for getting a temporary cover whilst a longer term solution is sorted out. And if the longer term solution is GB aligns to the EU standards, that will solve 90% of the problem. But you will still have problems of timing, as regulations cut across and derogation periods. So the real solution is we're in the UK market. The manufacturers represent themselves as this is the UK product offer. they're now having to consider having a slimmed down product offer for Northern Ireland because, only certain vehicles will apply. It doesn't make any sense to anybody. And the day the vehicle's registered, it can move anywhere, north, south, east or west, irrespective of its type approval.
Yeah.
So it's just one of these things that if someone could go and ask the question, I'm not sure there'd be too much objection to the solution. But there seems to be a reluctance on the part of the government to actually go and ask the question.
Okay, and in the very short term, if the derogation ends in January, if we don't see an extension to that, we're now in November, inevitably your companies will have to restructure, which ultimately could result in job losses. We're hearing that loud and clear. Is that a firm position?
Yep. As this pans out, yeah.
Okay, thank you for your time. Thanks, Chair, for your indulgence.
No problem. David?
Thank you. I've been repeated so many times since I said it, so I'm going to say it again for absolute clarity, that you've got the worst of every world, and it's disgraceful. We never wanted any borders, we never wanted any barriers, and at this late stage it's incredible that that is the case. You talked about the reluctance within the UK government. Why is there reluctance within the UK government, or why is there reluctance there?
We're not too sure, because there just seems to be a reluctance to go to the EU and ask for what we need. What they're trying to do is get the manufacturers to dual approve, which they're not happy to do. So that's something that you need to ask to the Secretary of State.
Okay, 2 questions then. So why is there cost involved in dual approval? What's the reluctance to the dual approval?
I mean, I suspect it's a lack of real understanding of what the issue is, what the impact of that issue is, and what the solution would be. I think if the Secretary of State was to get into the same level of detail as we've had with this committee and understood the issue, it might be more a burning question about what he can do. Clearly, there are lots of issues like this that are coming in front of this committee every day. This is just the latest. We've found solutions for bringing bacon in and all sorts of other issues. It shouldn't be beyond the power of possibility for minds to get around this and find a workable solution. I think everybody realises it's a problem. Everybody wants to fix it. So the people in power need to put some brain power into this and come up with a solution for us.
Okay, if we go back to the so is there cost involved from the manufacturer?
Are you talking about from a brand? Why a brand doesn't want to dual approve? Yes, there is. I mean, the last time I was here, I gave an example of General Safety Regulations 2, which came into Europe, but you didn't have to do that sort of stuff for the UK. So you could have a brand could have a saving by not type approving and putting into the vehicle exactly what the EU want. And that's where there's a divergence in some of the safety standards. So why would they type approve for EU when there's a model they can type approve for the UK?
So they're physically building a different car. That's what you're saying. They're physically building a different. Well, yeah. Because my next question was kind of why, as the industry sell their products, why do you not talk directly to the manufacturers to go? Has that happened? You said.
Sorry, what's your question?
You talked there about the dual thing, and the government needs to sort of inform. You said about information, lack of information within. Is there any work from yourselves as the brand reps here, if you like, to deal with the brands directly to talk, or is it simply down to cost that they build a simple?
Yeah, I mean we've appealed. We've appealed for dual approval for the brands that we represent.
Yeah.
But there is a UK type approval scheme, which is law, which they are perfectly entitled to type approve to the UK standard, and that's what they're doing.
So where does it? So the UK.
So it lies with the government. The government either need to change to EU type approval, which apparently there's a willingness to do so, but there is always a lag. Previously, when there was EU type approval, it just happened in the UK, but obviously, since Brexit has happened, that happens at a different pace in the UK as it does in the EU, and sometimes they won't even follow the EU standards. So this is where this problem has come.
Why was it January the last time you were with the Secretary of State? Is he not engaging, or is it not?
The Secretary of State did right, saying he recognised what the problem was, and I think we said officials would be looking into it. They're still looking into it. We've met with the Department of Transport, we've met with the Vehicle Certification Agency, And we're kind of pushing against an open door in terms of we all understand there's an issue here and we really want to fix it, but nobody's fixing it. And as Jeff has said, if you give the manufacturers a commercial opportunity to build to a different spec and sell that cheaper, they're going to do it, regardless of what the Secretary of State wishes.
It's economics, I suppose, for the manufacturer. So, last question for me then, what do you want us to do? What can we do to...
Well, that's what we would like you to tell us, because it seems to me that this is not a devolved issue, but we've got a lot of interest around this table. Yeah. But for those people who are actually responsible for it, we're not getting the same level of understanding or commitment to do something. So we would like you to tell us either what you can do for us or what more we can do ourselves.
From my perspective, and obviously we'll sum these up at the end, but there's probably a number of things that we can do. Firstly, I think it would be send a pretty strong message that the committee would write to Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's the UK Cabinet Minister responsible for EU relations, calling for an immediate extension, either that agreed or unilateral, of the derogation process for at least another year. Which would give that opportunity then, which is my second point in view, is that we then as a committee contact the Secretary of State and make clear that the claim that he made that this has been resolved hasn't been, and that as Northern Ireland representative in the Cabinet at UK level, he needs to be very clear, one, in terms of meeting you urgently, and two, what work he's doing to progress this to get a long-term solution. And finally, the UK Internal Market Guarantee Panel, which is a UK government agency set up under Strengthen the Union, whose work and responsibility is to ensure that there's flow of goods and services right across the internal market, and ask them to launch an inquiry into this issue. That's my particular view from just where I'm at, but obviously colleagues will have different views on that. Diana?
Yes, thank you, and thank you. It's good to see you here again. I'm sorry this problem still exists. I do see the threat that's coming down the line, but we briefly touched on mobility cars, and I'm just curious to know the impact this is having. Northern Ireland, reportedly 50% of new car sales are mobility cars. 40%.
40 this year to date.
40, it's good to know that, thank you. So how does that impact on that sector?
You see that?
In terms of supply, in terms of cost?
It mirrors that the retail market, there will be a longer lead time if you have to order the vehicles to a specific spec and type approval. And some of the vehicles, if they're not available in Northern Ireland, then they're on the Motability scheme at preferential rates, or cheaper cost of acquisition for those who avail of the scheme. That those models may not be available to order for consumers here.
Is that a sense of a discrimination against disabled people? Is that an argument that can be used as well?
Well, we wouldn't probably be flagging, but clearly it could be an unintended consequence of that. It's not something
it's choice. They may want to access a particular vehicle, it may not be available. They will have to access a different vehicle which is available. There may be a cost difference in that for them.
But we've seen before with the veterinary medicines and SPS that the extensions given there, and I do think your argument for looking for more extensions maybe is worth pursuing, and I do support what the Chair has said in terms of interventions and what we can do as a committee, and I hope it can yield some results. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Kate?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for your evidence. I wasn't here when you were last here, but yeah, I mean, you've made such a compelling case, and I'm so sorry you're still going through this. The Chair had written previously, and the Secretary of State has responded. So all I was going to say is I completely support the calls that we make, representation again. I think that's all we can do, and then anyone who has members of Parliament in Westminster as well advocating on that side. Just if there's anything else, the Chair's listed 3 kind of key points. Are you content with that? That we take that forward as a committee, and if there's anything else that's sitting with you that you would like us to do, to let us know.
I think that would be.
Yeah.
And there's a debate next week in the House of Lords on this issue. I think Lord Dodds might have been in contact with a number of you already on the issue. Yeah. Sinead, did you want in there? Apologies.
No, fine. I'm happy with the recommendations that you have made there, and I'm glad that the panel are content with us to move forward in that way. And I'm sorry that they're in this space.
at the moment, and progress has been really slow, and I'm sure they feel as if everybody's left them behind or they're not being prioritised, and it's important that we kind of hear them again and see what we can do to get their voices heard and some of these barriers overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sinead. Colleagues, thank you for that. We'll hopefully have responses on these quite soon, so we'll be in touch with you.
Okay,
thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, just wanted to check that we have agreement for those. So if I just summarise, so the committee sends a unanimous position to Nick Thomas Simmons calling for extension to the current derogation/transition period. Members content with that? Agreed. Okay. Secretary of State, in terms of his work on an urgent long-term solution, members content on that? And then finally, the UK Internal Market Guarantee Panel. Members content?
Sure, just to add to that, and that is an agreed position that we're essentially calling for that, transition period to be extended. I think there may be different opinions how in the longer term this could be sorted, but certainly in the immediacy, particularly with the January deadline, it should be useful that we should send that position clearly to the executive via the OFM DFM, so that they're aware that that's a unanimous position of this committee, that they use all power that they have to put pressure again in their engagement with UKG on the matter, because I think that's a very powerful statement that we're collectively saying that if we don't sort this and extend it from January, we have job losses.
Chair, committee also content just to copy this to the DSC committee as well. Yeah, okay, jolly good.
Okay, colleagues, thank you very much for that. That was very much appreciated. I'm going to move on then to item 8, which is Insolvency Practitioner Statutory Rule. The clerk's cover note is at page 236. The Department has laid a statutory rule entitled the Insolvency Practitioner Amendment and Transitional Provisions Regulations Northern Ireland 2025. The rule is subject to negative resolution procedure and will come into operation on the 9th of December 2025. The Insolvency Practitioner Regulation Northern Ireland 2006 set out the bond that insolvency practitioners are required to have. This appears to be a kind of insurance payment that insolvency practitioners would be required to make in the event of a fraud or dishonesty on their part or on the part of others with their conveyance. The specific penalty sum provides separate cover for each of the insolvency practitioner cases. The general penalty sum provides general cover for any cases where the SPS cover is insufficient. The regulations would increase the GPS from 25,000 to 750,000 and will provide for interest to be payable at a rate above sterling overnight index average on claims under the SPS and GPS. The regulations will require the SPS to provide cover for a minimum of 6 years after the date on which the insolvency practitioner is appointed to act in a case, and also provide for a minimum run-off period of 2 years following an insolvency practitioner's release or discharge, during which a claim may be made under the bond. The regulations will require the GPS to cover cases where there is no SPS and or where the SPS is insufficient to cover a claim. The regulations will require bond providers to provide specificity on what is covered and 60 days notice of when a bond is due to expire. The Department previously advised that these regulations match arrangements in England and Wales and are strongly welcomed by the insolvency bodies. The committee considered the SL1 on the 15th of October and had no concerns. It is presumed that the regulations do not deviate from the original proposals. Any member, any question? If not, put to the meeting that the Committee for the Economy has considered SR 2025/177, the Insolvency Practitioner Amendment and Transitional Provisions Regulations Northern Ireland 2025, and subject to the report of the ESR, has no objection to the rule. Members content? Thank you. Move then to item 9, correspondence. Members, doesn't seem to be anything controversial. Are members content to dispose of those as indicated in the index? Agreed. Okay, item 10, forward work plan. Peter, page 523.
Thanks, members. Just a reminder that next week the committee will be asked to look at the formal clause by clause for the Insolvency Amendment Bill. So by that stage, Oveen, the Bill clerk, will have come back to us with some draft amendments. Again, as indicated, as you know, The committee can adopt those amendments and put those down, or you can not. You can accept assurances instead from the Minister, or you could, once the committee's considered them, any member could take those amendments away and put them down themselves when we get the length of consideration stage. So that, hopefully, if all is well, the members are content, that will be that done. As the Chair mentioned earlier, the Department has cancelled the briefing which we'd scheduled for the 10th of December on the financial needs analysis in the higher education sector. So this would have been around money things, but also we'd asked for information about Momentum on Zero, the Advanced Manufacturing Centre, and so they're not ready to come and talk about that. So we'll be looking to fill that in with other things. And just to remind members that we'll be back early after Christmas on the 7th of January to hear from the Minister on budget. So the Chancellor will make her statement on the 26th. She will then effectively give an envelope to Minister O'Dowd, here's some money for the Executive, and the Executive will then go into a corner, work out what it's going to spend its money on for the next couple of years. Hopefully the Minister will be able to tell us whether that's a good deal or a bad deal on the 7th of January. And that's pretty much what is there. So, Chair, can I ask if the committee are content with the forward work programme as drafted?
Members content? Yep. Oh, great, thank you. Any other business members wish to raise at this stage? If not, then members will be back here on the 26th of November at 10 a.m. Thank you very much for your attendance, and the committee will now adjourn.
Members, thank you very much.
Committee Room 30, sound. 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 Committee Room 30. 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 Sound. Committee Room 30, 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 sound. Committee Room 30. 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 Sound. Committee Room 30, 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 sound. Committee Room 30. 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 Committee Room 30, sound. 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 Committee Room 30, Sound.